Okay, Ollie O'Neill here, and welcome to my first tutorial in Blender. Okay, we're going to start off the program itself. To get rid of the splash screen, you just left click outside of it. Now, just before I begin, I'm going to go through a few things. First of all, get yourself a copybook or something like that, just to write down the keyboard shortcuts, just so you can go through them once a week, just so you're kind of well versed in them. And the other thing is, make sure you have above Blender 2.5, I think, is when the interface changed to what it is now. Now, I reckon Blender won't change an interface for a good long while. So if you're using maybe a 2.62 or even a 2.7, the interface won't be that much different. Now, to begin with, Blender is grey. Everything in it's quite ugly, and when you begin it, it's not the prettiest interface. The reason for that is that basically 3D animators work really long hours, and the grey color is the least strenuous on the eyes for long hours of work. And that's why most things in Blender are in grey. And you'll find most editing software, if they're anyway decent, are grey, have grey boxes and grey windows and whatnot. So that's why Blender's grey, just to let you know to start off. It's one of the things I hated about Blender when I first started using it. But I figured out why I was told why it was actually they do it that way. So to begin with, Blender does everything for a reason. Blender's interface itself is made up of windows. Now you can change the content or the main use of the window with these little buttons in the bottom left corner. Now these, there's also, you have them in the top left hand corner or top right hand corner, wherever, it depends on the interface you're using. But every window has a header. So this window here, I'll just get rid of the tool shelf on the left, is the 3D view. This window here at the bottom is the animator view. You could change that to the 3D view as well if you wanted. It's the timeline view, should I say. This window on the right is the properties editor, and so on. Now these windows don't block each other. That's why Blender's structured the way it is. In old versions of Photoshop, I don't know whether they do it now, you'd have floating windows and you could sort of move them around the scene. But Blender's designed so nothing gets in the way of anything else. So nothing can hover over anything else. To resize these windows, you left click on the partitions between them. So this line that divides the two, if you wanted to make the one on the right bigger, you'll also make the one on the right smaller, because it's trying not to get in its way. Now, the other thing is you can split these views. So you have that on the top right hand corner and bottom left hand corner, you have these little tree line segments. And if you click on it and grab it, it'll split the view. Now to get rid of these, you just click on it again and drag it towards it. So it's fairly simple. Now, also in all these views, you have one header that has a bar that can change the type of view it's in. The other thing is you have a selection of information about what you're in. So I'm currently in the 3D view, and I can modify things in the 3D view with these three sub-menus. They will pop up, but the minute you leave them, they won't get in the way of anything else. There's the main header of Blender, which is this thing here, and it contains file, the basic file, Microsoft sort of thing. It also contains layouts. So currently I'm in the default screen layout. I can change to say the animation layout, or say UV editing layout. So it's basically just rearranged the windows for UV editor and changed the timeline editor and moved it up here and changed it to the UV editor. So these layouts are fairly simple. Now you can rearrange all these windows and then press the little plus button to add a layout. And to add that layout to the full version of Blender, you press Control U, or you can go File and Save as default, and it'll be saved into the actual main Blender file. So if you have a different screen layout you want to use for a different type of editing, you just you can put it up here. Now there's a quick way to change between those windows, which is Control Left or Control Right. So Control Left changes up through them and Control Right changes down through them. Now on this main window here we have the property or the 3D view. This is where you're going to be doing most of your work, especially with modeling. Now there's other things like animating, which you might probably go into another view. that mightn't have anything to do with it, but for most of your Blender work, it's done in the 3D view. There's also one last thing to comment on Blender is you can press Shift, and if you click on the window, it'll highlight up. That's the one exception that Blender has to the floating window thing. And the reason for this is that if you have a second monitor and you want to put a set of screens inside that second monitor, you can bring up that floating window and bring it over to the second monitor. But for most things, Blender's non-blocking or non-modal, which means that things don't get in the way of anything else. So that's the basic interface. We'll go into user preferences. Now, the user preferences you can get up by pressing Control-Alt-U, or you can go into File up here on the left, and it's down there, User Preferences. Now, user preferences are basically, there's not much you need to change in this. There's a few little things I like to add in. Now, to start with, that's your interface, and everything you hover over will have a little description basically saying what it does. So you can change them at your own leisure, and each of these tick boxes, you know what tick boxes do. Now, editing is, there's nothing you really need to change in this. There's a few things you can do for automatic keyframe insertion and things like that. You can also go to input, and this is where the two things I like to change are, there's continuous grab, which what that does is, I'll give you a quick show. I'll turn it off first just to show you it. User preferences, continuous grab. Say I was to want to move this object, so you press G to grab the object. I'll go over that later, and say you move it off screen. Now there's a limit. You come to the edge of screen and you get stuck. You stop. Say you want to rotate it, the same happens. You get stuck at the edge of screen. What continuous grab does, I'll just bring it up now. Where is it? Continuous grab does is, say I wanted to, I'll zoom out a bit and grab, say I was moving that to the right. The minute I get to the edge of the screen, pop, it goes to the other side of the screen. The mouse goes to the left hand side of the screen, and it'll continue on moving it as if it's kind of like on a conveyor belt. You won't get stuck at the side of the screen. So that's one thing that I like to change in the user preferences. The other thing is, if you're on trackball, change it to turntable. Now, the reason trackball was invented is for trackball mice. Now, that's the way you orbit something. Now, when you left or middle mouse click, you can kind of orbit, you change the view. You orbit a virtual point in front of you. Now, the trackball is kind of, it keeps everything, so the actual rotation of your view, if you were to rotate it around that way or rotate it around that way, it doesn't change. Whereas with trackball, you can actually rotate around that way and rotate around that way. Now, the reason that was invented is for trackball mice, which a lot of 3D animators use, and I'll probably end up using it myself someday, is that trackball mice are, it's kind of like you're moving the scene itself as if the ball is virtually in the scene, and you're moving the ball as if the ball is the scene itself. So that's what the trackball mice is for. Now, all these on the right are just they're the keyboard shortcuts, and you can change them how you like. See, they're all on the right there. You can change them up all the way you want. I advise you not to go around and mess with them unless you know what you're doing. Now, the add-ons is the next bit. There's not many things to say about the add-ons. If you want to know about them, you just open up the little thing and it'll tell you what it does. And to add them on, you just click this little highlight button on the right. If there's a warning bit on the left, I think it means it's might be a bit glitchy. These just change which add-on you're looking at. So these are the enabled, the disabled ones, all ones that are in testing and things like that. So those add-ons are kind of they're not really that important. I like to have the spacebar one on because the old Blender used spacebar to add things. I also like 3D view material utilities and things like that. They just add extra things to the toolbars and whatnot. And a lot of the other ones that I add are basically shapes, that when you go to add a shape, you can add different types of shapes. Sorry. So they're the ones I like to add in that. Now, teams is just changing the color of different parts of like menus and things like that. I advise you to stick with gray. You could probably make a nice like mustard yellow color or something like that. Go nuts if you want to, I don't mind. Now, this is the filing system of Blender. This is where things automatically end up, or where Blender automatically takes things from. So say you had a font that you wanted to put into a 3D object, you'd put your fonts in here or textures in here, and that's basically where Blender basically normally puts things or takes things from. Um, System itself is a bit more complicated. I'm not going to go into here. You can change basically how Blender does things, like how it draws things and how it interacts with the 3D software or the 3D cards and whatnot. I'd advise you not to change anything in here unless you go and look it up, thoroughly look it up, not just a little bit, like a sample ratio 44.1 hertz. That's, I presume, to do with the sound. So that's changing how the sound is dealt with in Blender, and OpenGL is to do with the 3D graphics card. So I wouldn't really, I probably wouldn't try to change anything in this section unless you truly go thoroughly into what each and every one of the things do. So some of them aren't too fussy, but I still would try to I still try to look up most of them if you wanted to change them. Anyway, so that's the user preferences. Change it as you will, and then save as default if you want to change how Blender uploads or whatever.